Hi, welcome to 20 Pincushion Ideas from GourmetQuilter. I'm Susan Clare, the GourmetQuilter. We're having a lot of fun. We're doing 20 different pincushions, one a day for 20 days. We are up to day 3, so we're getting well into it now. So what we're doing this time is a little silhouette tree, which I thought was rather fun. This actually, the inspiration for this really came from some traditional cut work embroidery. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's got little cutout areas in it. And I was thinking, well, how can we do that on a pincushion that wasn't very laborious hand embroidery, because I'm not very good at that. So what I've done is make this tree, and it is all like a free-form tree that's stitched in there. So it is all cut away. So this is my version of cut work. I thought it was kind of appealing. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So if you're interested in the pattern, if you don't already have the pattern coming, it's a downloadable pattern that comes through the website for the pincushions. So all of the patterns come one a day, and you can download and print them. So in the meantime, I will show you how to get going with doing this wonderful tree. So we do a little bit of free motion stitching, although I'm quite sure if you didn't want to free motion you wouldn't have to. I'm going to free motion my actual tree, but I'm reasonably confident you could do it just with a straight stitch. So I've got all my pieces cut out here. The pattern tells you all about the cutting. I've got some framework. I'm going to use different colours this time. I've got a background piece and some of this framework because we're making a little frame to go around here. I've got the backing piece. I've got some batting. I like to put a little bit of batting in, and I've got my tree colour. The tree is going to be this rusty brown colour, and then this is going behind my tree, so that's a bit bright and leery this time. So first of all we need to, and some fusible web. I've already put the fusible web on the back of my piece of fabric that the tree is going to go on. So first of all, in the pattern you're going to have a shape to trace. It looks a little bit weird out to the edges, and that's because the tree actually goes right to the edges of the pincushion the way I've made it, so that it's kind of all secured. So we need to trace this design, or make your own up of course, onto your tree fabric. Now this is fairly dark, however my light box coped. As long as I just took it carefully, I put it on the brightest setting. This light box has 3 settings, and I just placed this fabric over there, and I can just see. It's not super easy to see, but if you've got the paperback fusible on the back before you do all this, it does possibly make it slightly harder to see, but it makes it much easier to draw because it's held nice and firm with that fusible and the paper on the back there. Now I've got a marking pen here. This is a mechanical pencil that's got a yellow lead in it, which is perfect for this sort of thing. I've actually already gone ahead and done my tree, but because it's got a nice fine line, which is good, and it will erase afterwards if I want it to, and I can just trace those lines. So that these lines are sort of the cutting line come stitching line, so you don't want them to be too wide for anything, but we need to trace that design onto, or draw a design onto our fabric, and then we want to put that back to back with another piece of fabric. So I'm just putting the same fabric but on the back side, because this tree here is the same back and front, and that fusible web gives us a nice bit of stability so that we can do the stitching straight onto it. So I'm just going to fuse these two together. I guess the back side wouldn't have to be the same fabric, but it's probably easier on the edges, because the edges will end up being a raw edge, so we're just going to be cutting them near the sewing. So there, I've got my tree all ready to stitch. So I've got my machine set up ready for free motion sewing. I've dropped my feed teeth. I've got a little open-toed free motion foot on there, and I've got a dark grey thread, because I thought the dark grey, I didn't want it to jump at you. On this one here you can see the thread quite distinctly. On this one here it won't be as distinct, but it will still give it a little bit of an edge. So I'm just suggesting that when you do this sort of stitching, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. It's not meant to be, in my opinion, absolutely perfect. We like the little organic word. I think organic stitching is good. I'm going to go over my lines, and so it comes up here and comes out to the edge, so that you can sort of stop and start anywhere if you want to. But I'm also going to go over every line twice, and it won't matter if they're not exactly on top of each other. I feel that adds a little bit to the interest. And if anything, stay within the tree side rather than going out side that line that we've drawn on there. Now we won't see all these ends, but I'm just going to follow that line up. As I said, trees are organic. My sewing can be quite organic too. And then I'm going to come back over that line, or close to that line if it's not exactly on it. Now trees can be quite gnarly and knobbly, so we can have gnarly and knobbly stitching if you like. So I think that if you didn't want to do free motion, you could easily do this with a regular foot on. Now I've just gone wider at these edges of the branches because they're hidden, and I thought it would just hold better. So this one here is going to come out on this branch. You can't see where you're going backwards, you can turn the work. That's the beauty of small things. Now this is working nicely with this fusible web as my stabilizer and the other piece of fabric. To just do it on a single layer of fabric would present more problems, because when you do free motion it doesn't have the same level of tension and it wants to scrunch everything up. So I think you've got the hang of how I'm doing that now. So I'll continue on doing double stitching on all my lines for my tree, and then I'll show you how we go about cutting it out. So I've nearly finished my tree, just got this last little bit to do here. Have our tree all stitched. How amazing is that? So as usual, I'm just going to give it a quick press. So that's all looking pretty good. I've got it all stitched. It doesn't stand out a huge amount like this, but it will when we put it onto a different background, of course. So what I'm going to do now is just cut quite close to the stitching. So on this one here you can see I'm really quite close. Just be careful you don't actually cut your stitching. So some good sharp scissors work really well for this sort of work. Some smaller scissors, you don't want great big chunky ones if you can avoid it. And really we're just going to cut up just close to the stitching, quite close, because it's got, I'm actually using a batik cloth which has got a nice tight weave to it, but also because of the fusible web that's in there, that's going to hold quite nicely. So try and cut fairly consistently, as close as you reasonably can to that stitching, so that you get nice shaping and all sorts of things going on. So it's really not that hard, it just takes a little bit of time to do all this. You just have to cut fairly carefully. And there's one segment out already. So all the little the areas behind the branches need to be cut away so that we just get those branches standing out nicely. So I think you've probably got the hang of what I'm doing now. So I'll go ahead and keep cutting and then show you how to put it all together. So I've gone ahead and finished cutting out all my tree. It's looking quite exciting on that bright orange background. Oh my goodness. You might be thinking, oh, it looks a whole lot bigger than what I've made here, but in actual fact it's just the same. The side seams come around the sides of this pincushion, and these bits here come around to the side too. So I've taken the cut work area right to the edges so that everything is held in nice and secure. So we're going to set that aside on it. It can just sit on its background for the moment. We're going to set it aside and get ready to make this little frame that comes around here. So again, in the pattern there's a shape here for you to cut out. There's going to be a little window in there, but we're going to trace it and stitch it before we cut it. So same thing with the light box. I've got the light box here. I've used this yellow pencil again. It's wonderful for this sort of work. And again, I can just see on here we haven't got any fusible web or anything this time. It's just the fabric, and I've just drawn on the pattern. There's a little dotted dashed line, and that's the stitching line. That's the line we want to trace. So I've already drawn that on mine, but that's how you would go about it. And we now just need to put it right sides together with its other piece. which was sitting right here, both the same anyway. And I'm going to stitch right on that drawn line. Not sure if you can see it, it is in that yellow pencil. So it's got little curved corners because it's going to make this nice little curved window here. So I'll go ahead and stitch that right on that line, and then I'll show you how we make that into that little framework. So I'm just finishing sewing this. I'm just going around these little curved corners. Well, this curved corner, I've done the others. Back stitch to finish off. So what we've got is 2 pieces of fabric right sides together, and you probably can't see it because I've used dark thread and everything, but I've stitched this little dotted line on my piece of fabric, holding them together there. So we just want to cut the centre part out now. So we're going to cut probably about an eighth, leave about an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, maybe a touch more, but not as much as 1/4 of an inch because it just gets a bit bulky. So we just want to cut all that away. So we're cutting out the centre area. We don't need that bit. So it doesn't take too long to do this, just trim that out. And then we're just going to clip into those corners any second now, so that they'll sit nicely when we turn it out, because we're going to be turning it out on this seam to make a nice frame there. So in these little corners here, where it's curved around the corner, we just want to put 2 or 3 little snips. So don't cut your stitching, that would not be helpful. Because when we turn it out the right way, it's going to want to open out. And so if we've given it a little bit of elbow room there with some little snips in it, it does help a lot with things sitting nicely. And so we need to bring the iron over now and press all that. So we're going to turn this, basically we're turning this out through the hole. So we're putting one piece in through to make a nice finished edge on that frame. So I found that the best way when we're working with just small pieces like this is to just press over that longer part there, press the seam in, and on the top and the bottom edge as well, shorter ones. And then we can play with the corners on their own rather than trying to do everything in one go. So just come around and press all that. Then that should go through a little bit more easily, and now we can come back and exactly the same. We can generally ignore the corners still, but get this little edge so that it's sitting nicely for the straight parts. Oops, we need to push that through, put it inside out still, so that that raw edge is encased now in this little area here. And so by the time we've done all this, those corners should end up sitting quite nicely. Nearly there. A little bit fiddly doing some of these things, but I think worth it because you get some really nice effects. So I've done all the 4 straight bits. Now I just need to make sure that the corners are sitting nice and smoothly, and they seem to be doing a pretty good job. Just need a little bit of encouragement with these irons. Irons are wonderful things. So that's all looking pretty impressive, I think, and that will sit better when it's got something to sit on, because it's got quite a big hole there. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be having a piece of batting sit behind our background piece that our tree is going to sit on, and then we're going to put this piece over the top there so that it just gives you a nice, like a little framed picture of that tree. So all those edges should all match up, and they will. That will all end up sitting nice and flat there. And so all the little bits of tree and things are going to get caught in, but in actual fact we're going to stitch that. I'm just going to press the tree first so that everything's sitting nice. It's not fused or anything, it's still sitting loose, but everything's better with a press. So now I'm just going to, same thing, this isn't fused either, but if you just iron it in place, it does just help everything sit quite nicely, because we are going to stitch this frame on. So you may want to put a couple of pins, oh if only we had a pincushion, or some clips to hold around the edges, because we don't want it to move too much, because what we're going to do is stitch it, and we want the tree to sit nicely as well. We're just going to stitch along this edge here all the way around the frame, not even as much perhaps as 1/8 of an inch, just quite close to that fold. 1/8 of an inch if you want to, it would be fine, but no more than that, because otherwise when it's sitting on the edge it'll start gaping too much. So just a nice fairly close in line of stitching around the frame through all those layers, and that will hold all that really nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch that. I think everything's just going to sit nicely, and that the tree branches come out to the edge there, and so everything is looking pretty good. So like I said, just stitch close to that little finished edge that we've just created and stitch all the way around. So I'll keep going and I will show you when I get to the other end. So I've gone ahead, I've finished doing my stitching close to that nice edge there. If we look in here, we can still see little bits of branch sticking out there, but that's all okay. We don't need to worry about that. What we're going to do now is just join it right sides together with the back of the pincushion, just a 1/4 inch seam all the way around, leaving a gap for turning and filling, which I would suggest that you leave at the lower edge, but it wouldn't really matter, although there are little tree branches that may get in the way in other places. I may actually just remove, that's quite a solid piece of the trunk there, which it is all fixed in, so you could take away all of those bits if you wanted to, but I might just take this bit away so that it doesn't get in our way when we're just doing the little bit of hand sewing at the end. So other than that, I'm going to stitch those two together. I'm going to leave a gap there, a couple of inches, so I can turn it out and fill it. Just my 1/4 inch seam all the way around, and I'll come back and show you. We're going to just do something with the corners as well. So I've done all my stitching around, but I'm also going to do these little paper bag type corners. So if you're familiar with those, you'll know how to do that. If you're not familiar, I've left one still to do. So I've already done 3 of them. So what we need to do is get inside, and you need to be in the right bit of inside so that the tree's not in your way. And we want to go into the corner there, and you just want to open that corner so that it folds diagonally, so that the fold is going through the corner where we've stitched both sides, so that seam is running straight up there and straight there. A little bit hard to probably see what I'm doing. And then we're just going to stitch across there, and that just gives us these nice little shortened corners here with a little bit of height to them. So we don't want to stitch too far in. We want to go from about 1/2 inch from the point. So the point is not the point of the fabric, it's the point where we've done the stitching to. And if you have it so that the seams are coming towards you, it should go through fine. And if you've got a little plate on your sewing machine with markings on, there is actually a marker at 1/2 inch, so you can put the point of your sewing against that marker, and that will just sew beautifully for you. So just a little stitch across that corner, a back stitch to hold it, and there we've done our little corner already. So you need to do that to all 4 corners, and I do suggest just trimming off those corners about 1/4 inch away from the stitching line, just so that there's not that sort of bulk sitting in there. And now we get to turn it out and see how it's all looking and ready to fill it. So you probably just want to be a little bit careful because of that tree being loose, that you don't catch it as you turn it. But it's looking pretty good. So we just want to push those corners so that they're sitting out nicely. We probably don't need to particularly press this one because it hasn't got the flat sort of sharp edges on it. That should all just seat itself quite nicely. So it comes down into a nice little size, and now it needs filling. So I'm going to be using what I've been using, the crushed walnut shell. I really like the crushed walnut shell. It kind of just allows things to just plump nicely. It's great. It keeps the pins fairly sharp. They use walnut shell industrially as an abrasive, like for sort of sandblasting type things, I believe, and amongst other things that they do with it. I don't know what else they do with it. You may just want to press those little edges in. Actually, I might just do that. So the edges that we're going to be hand stitching to close it, we still want that to be sort of easy enough to achieve. So even though we're not, it's kind of on a flat edge, we just want to press those little bits in so that they're easy enough when we come to sew them. They'll probably move while we fill, but they have a little memory, these little folds. And so then I'm just going to fill as I have been with the crushed walnut shell. So you can use polyfill, or you could use wool rovings. There's lots of things you can put in pincushions. Doesn't not have to be this. You can use sand and things. Because I'm using the walnut shell, that's one of the reasons I use the batting, so that it just helps contain all the little bits of the granules and things. But there's lots of different things you can use, and you may have your own preferred thing to put in a pincushion. So I'll go ahead and get this all done, and I'll show it to you when it's all finished. So I've gone ahead, I've finished my little pincushion. I've got that sun glowing behind that tree. I'm pretty thrilled with the way that's come up. Because we stitched this little edge down here, everything's nice and secure. It allows that to sit nicely on top. Great place to stick our pins and needles. Maybe not necessarily through the tree because that's a little bit stiff, but there's lots of other places there. You could even pop a little bird in the tree, who knows. So that was the little pincushion number 3 that we've done, and I will see you again with pincushion number 4.